Welcome to Solo Travel Adventures, my sisters. Don't let fear hold you back from traveling alone. I want you to gather your courage, listen to inspiring stories, and learn how to travel solo while safely navigating new places from this show. I'm Cheryl Esch, solo travel advocate and travel coach, and I want you to have a transformative experience when you travel solo. So pack your bags, book your flight, and check one more time for that passport. It's time to explore the world. Hello, sister travelers. Well, it's September, although it doesn't feel that way here in Texas, where we're still getting very hot weather. But September always makes me think about going back to school and the idea of kind of getting back into a routine. You know, the summer vacations are over, unfortunately, and we're getting back to sort of, I'll say, normal life. And if you have kids, then yeah, you have that still going on in your life. But maybe you're an empty nester. My youngest son is in college, so we got one more year, I think, of that whole idea of going back to school. But it also goes back to my whole, I actually used to be a professor at some colleges. So, my year usually, got started in the fall. In September, things ramped up for fall semester, which was always so exciting. And I loved the idea of routines, even though I'm a very spontaneous person and I love to just take off on a weekend or do something fun. We're wired to really need those routines, those habits that, things that you do on a day-to-day basis that make you. I'm sure if you think about it, even if you don't think you have habits or routines, you do. Think about, what do you do every morning when you get up? What's the first thing you do, right? Everybody's got something that they do. Or what do you do to prepare yourself to go to bed at night, right? There's always these little habitual routines that we have, put into our lives, whether they were intentional or unintentional. But how does that relate to travel, right? You're probably thinking, well, I believe continuing those routines in your life, those habits that you've developed, those morning or evening routines or whatever you like to call them, help create a much better travel experience. Think about it. Travel really messes up your schedule, right? So how do we do this? Thinking about, a lot of travel, unless you're just going 1 or 2 hour time difference away, most of us, when we think about traveling, it's several hours difference, possibly, unless you're going somewhere just maybe from one European country to another, or you're in the US and you're just going maybe one time zone over, then maybe it doesn't mess up your sleep or it doesn't mess up your schedule, so to speak. But let's say, for example, you were going somewhere where it's 6 hours or even 12 hours difference from what you're used to. This requires you to really adjust, right? And it can mess up lots of things. It can mess up your sleep. It can mess up, for me, I hate to say this, it messes up my bowel movements, but we get those back on track. I do certain things, but we won't get into that. But what I'm getting at is that routines are going to help you be, at least for me, less cranky on that trip, right? I get cranky when I don't have those patterns, those things that I do. For example, how many of you out there have your morning ritual of how you do your coffee or tea, right? And so there's a ritual or routine, whatever you like to call it, wrapped around maybe just that or whatever you do in the morning. And let's say you go somewhere else and you can't get that. Maybe coffee's not even available. Well, heaven forbid, right? But it gets a little out of whack. And so then you get out of whack. So why am I bringing this up? Well, my reason is I've been thinking about how important these are even while we travel. And so having to make those adjustments while you're traveling to create these or to continue these routines or habits that you already do. That way you're going to be feeling more yourself. You're going to have a better experience on your trip and you're not going to be so out of whack. So you ask, how do we do that, right? Especially if you're talking about multiple hours difference in time zones, right? Well, I'm not going to get into like how to beat jet lag. That could be a whole episode in itself. But what I will tell you is you do need to adjust to the time zone that you're going to, right? If you don't, you're going to be missing out. You're going to be so out of whack. You're going to be awake at night when everything's closed, or vice versa. And you're not going to be able to experience the place as a normal person, right? So thinking about that. So just a quick thing that you could do, obviously, is a lot of international flights could be evening flights, right? And they get you to your destination in the morning, potentially, not always. If you can, obviously, you're going to try to sleep on the plane. I am not a good plane sleeper, so this doesn't always work for me. But they also say once you get to your destination and say you are doggone tired, right? You got to push through that first day, unfortunately, so that you can get a good night's sleep, so that you are ready to go the next day. So that's one thing that you can do, is to maybe learn how to adjust your sleep to correspond with whatever time zone you're in. That's going to be key. Then we look at our routine. So the first thing you need to do is, number one, is you need to evaluate your current routines or habits that you do on a regular basis. For example, my morning routine, I have lots of things that I do that make my morning a happy place for me, right? And if I'm rushed and I don't get a chance to do these things, I'm stressed, I'm cranky, and I'm not at my best, to be honest. And so one of those things, I know sometimes time gets short and it's not always up to us. For example, I'm not a morning person. And so, I try not to schedule a 6 a.m. flight. It's not always up to me, but I try to, if I can, I try to avoid those, because I know it's going to mess a lot of things up with me. Not only making me cranky, right? But it's going to mess up all my routines, my schedule, and how I feel throughout the day. So think about, what do you do in your day-to-day? What is your morning schedule? What do you do? What do you do when you first wake up? All right? Do you check your mail, your phone, right? Most people do. I try not to. I have other things I want to do before I actually look at my phone, so that I'm not distracted. One of those things is I do some prayer and meditation. So it's important that I get that in. And when I travel, I've noticed when I don't get that time, I'm not at my best, right? I feel like I'm definitely shorter, I'm crankier, my day doesn't go as smooth. So for me, when I travel, I try to carve out that time as best I can. And maybe it's a little shortened, but I have to create that environment as best I can so that I can get my routine in and be a happy person, right? So think about, what do you do? Maybe even write it down and look at not just what you do in the morning. Is there something that you do every afternoon? Do you like that afternoon nap for a little 20, 30 minutes, right? Or is it an evening thing that kind of helps you wind down from the day? What do you do there? So write those things down. And then when you go on your next trip, I want you to see if you can continue those, if you can implement those. Get yourself back on whatever time zone, sleep schedule that is, and then look at how you can create these habits, these routines, even while you travel. Okay, do you like to exercise in the morning or evening, whatever? See if you can incorporate, whether it's just a little stretching. I like to do stretching in the evening. So that's important for me. And when I travel, I find that's even more important, because if you're doing a lot of walking, you're going to need to do some stretching, right? You're walking around, you're sightseeing, and your legs can get achy, your feet can get cramped. And so keeping that routine of, just do there's 5-minute stretchings that I do, that just keeps my body limber, and my body actually likes that when I travel. So that's just an example of something that I would that I do in the evenings that I continue to do when I travel as best I can. Now, I know there are going to be circumstances where you don't have that control. But if you have that control, for example, maybe if you're doing a walking tour or a group tour, schedule it at a time that's not going to mess up your schedule. For example, if you're like me and you're not a morning person, or you like to have your leisurely mornings, don't schedule a 7 or 8 a.m. tour, right? Maybe schedule it for later in the day when you're a little more at your prime. You know yourself better than anybody as to when those kind of things could fit into your through So these are just some ideas I've been thinking about and really trying to create that. One thing I used to do is I used to do a little rebounding in the morning. It's a little trampoline. I did 5 to 7 minutes. I haven't had access to my trampoline lately, so I've incorporated some quick jumping jacks in the morning just to get sort of just that blood flowing, that energy going. And so for me, that's part of my, morning routine now. And that's something that's also easy to take with you when you travel. So you can kind of think about that too. Are there things that can adapt that you could take with you on your travels? One thing is I had to learn to adjust is when I drink coffee, I can be a coffee snob, meaning I like my coffee a very specific way. I do a French press. I grind the beans as soon as, right before I brew it. And I have to have certain mixtures, I put my collagen in it and all that good stuff. And when I travel, unfortunately, I can't get the quality coffee that I like. Sometimes if I'm on a road trip, I can take it with me, right? But if I'm going somewhere, for example, when I went to Belize, I wasn't sure what kind of coffee or would be available, right? So I actually weaned myself off coffee before the trip because I wasn't sure if that would be something I'd be able to continue as my regular morning routine, right? So sometimes I've had to make adjustments to that depending on where I am. But as much as you can, sisters, keeping those routines part of even your daily activities while you travel. It's part of who you are, and it's going to make your whole travel and your whole enjoyment of your trip a much better experience. If you're going to be cranky all the time because you're feeling very off-kiltered because you're not doing those things, then that's going to create just this bad memory or bad taste of what that trip really was, when in fact it could have turned out better, maybe just by your mental state, how you're feeling. So that's something to consider. So as I mentioned just a little bit ago, if you're not sure what you do, and we all have them, and you just need to evaluate, write them down. What is it that you do every day on a day-to-day basis that you could continue to do while you travel? And don't think that they can't be done. And maybe you want to take a break from them for a week, and that's fine. But I'm such a person of habit, and humans are we are a culture of we're human beings. We like routine. We like having schedules, right? It's just kind of part of us. Yes, you can go off the rails and you can explore and you can do something different every once in a while, but you will find yourself coming back to those routines. So think about that for your next trip and see how you can adjust or continue those as you do your travel on your next trip. It's almost like part of bringing home with you, bringing those comforts of home with you, meaning those things that you are comfortable with, things that you do that just make you, right? And so think about that and bring them with you on your next trip. Well, sisters, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends. Hey, sister travelers, did this podcast inspire and encourage you or move you to get out there and travel? Wonderful. There are 3 ways you can thank me. First one is leave a written review for the show on Apple Podcast. 2, share the show with your sister travelers, your friends, your family. And 3, subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. And thank you again for listening to the show. Sisters, be fearless, take the leap, and get out there and have an adventure.